Imagine this. You're 7 years old, tucked under your duvet, and your parent is reading you a bedtime story. The protagonist is innocent. The villain is obvious. Good triumphs. You drift off feeling safe. But here's what nobody tells you. That story just taught you how to be groomed. Welcome back to Story and Shadow. I'm going to show you something uncomfortable today. How one of the world's most beloved fairy tales is actually a masterclass in predatory psychology, encoded in a narrative that's been read to children for centuries. We're diving deep into Red Riding Hood, and trust me, once you see the pattern, you'll never read it the same way again. The tale everyone thinks they know, and why that's dangerous. Before we dissect the darkness, we need to establish what we're actually talking about. Red Riding Hood exists in hundreds of versions, and this is crucial. Each one reflects the anxieties and power structures of its time. The version most of us grew up with is a Victorian sanitization of something far more sinister. Charles Perrault's 1697 version, Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, ends with the wolf eating the girl. Not metaphorically, the child is consumed. Then Perrault adds a moral. Beware of strangers, especially charming ones. But here's where it gets psychological. He's not actually warning children. He's warning their parents that their daughters are in danger from predatory men, and crucially, that the daughters themselves might be complicit through naivety or disobedience. The Brothers Grimm, publishing their version in 1812, essentially victim-blamed harder. They added a rescue narrative in which a huntsman saves her, which sounds progressive until you realize it replaces her agency with paternal rescue. The girl doesn't escape through her own wit or strength. She waits for a man to save her. But the tale's psychological architecture transcends these variations. The core narrative remains unchanged. And it's this core that teaches predatory patterns so effectively that it's been embedded in Western culture for over 3 centuries. The real question isn't what happens in Red Riding Hood. It's what does the structure of Red Riding Hood teach about power, vulnerability, and transgression? And that structure is alarmingly sophisticated. The tale doesn't just describe danger, it models the exact psychological mechanisms of predatory grooming. This isn't metaphorical, this is functional. The wolf's approach, the girl's compliance, the authority figure's absence, the transgression of boundaries, the breakdown of protective systems, it's all there. And we've been teaching it to children while calling it a moral lesson. Let me show you how. The architecture of isolation. Why Red Riding Hood was always vulnerable. The story begins with separation. Red is sent alone into the forest. This detail appears so natural in retellings that we barely notice it, but it's absolutely essential to understanding the tale as a grooming narrative. In the Grimm version, the mother gives explicit instructions: stay on the path, don't talk to strangers, don't dawdle. These aren't safety measures, they're the conditions of Red's vulnerability. She's being sent through dangerous territory with impossible rules. Not don't go, but go and follow these rules. This creates cognitive dissonance. The child internalizes that she should be able to handle this, that she's old enough, that obedience to the path equals safety. This is textbook grooming preparation. The victim is isolated, given rules that can't fully protect her, and made to feel responsible for her own safety while simultaneously being placed in danger. Psychologist Harriet Hall, in her analysis of how children internalize risk, notes that fairy tales create a false sense of competence. Red believes she understands the rules. The rules feel empowering. I can do this, I'm trusted with this responsibility, when they're actually the mechanism of her exposure. The forest itself is crucial here. It's not just a setting, it's a psychological space where standard rules don't apply. In Jungian terms, the forest represents the unconscious, the realm where hidden desires and dangers lurk. By sending Red through it, the narrative is essentially saying, to become an adult woman, you must traverse the unconscious alone. But she's not actually alone, is she? Because predators don't hunt where there's supervision. They hunt in structural absences, and the story creates a perfect one. The wolf as psychological archetype, how predators present themselves. Here's where the tale reveals something genuinely disturbing about how predatory behavior actually works. The wolf doesn't attack Red immediately. In fact, he's charming. He engages her in conversation. He shows interest in her life. In most versions, he asks her where she's going and what she's carrying, basic information gathering. He's not menacing, he's warm, he's engaged. He's paying attention to her. This is how actual predators operate. Research on grooming behavior, conducted extensively by organizations like the Stop It Now network, shows that predators typically build trust through conversation, shared interests, and demonstrated care. They make the victim feel seen and understood. This isn't incidental to the process, it's the entire mechanism. The wolf in Red Riding Hood does something even more calculated. He suggests an alternative route. He recommends she pick flowers for her grandmother. He's not forbidding her from the path. He's gently suggesting she break her own rules. And critically, he frames this as being for someone she loves. She's not disobeying for selfish pleasure. She's gathering flowers as a gift. This is textbook predatory framing. The victim is given agency in their own transgression. The boundary violation is reframed as an act of love or care, but the wolf gains something else in this moment. Information about Red's location, her grandmother's location, and the fact that the grandmother is alone and likely elderly. The wolf then races ahead of Red, creating a scenario where he can be positioned as a protector or authority figure when she arrives. He arrives at the grandmother's house first and either locks the grandmother away or, in some versions, consumes her. Then he gets into the grandmother's bed, in the grandmother's clothes. This is profound. The wolf doesn't just impersonate the grandmother, he occupies her protective role. He's not an external threat anymore, he's an internal one. He's positioned himself as the trusted authority. Red's safety mechanism, the grandmother, has been replaced with the predator. When Red arrives, the famous dialogue unfolds. "What big eyes you have. All the better to see you with, my dear." In the context of grooming, this dialogue is a predator's self-awareness made audible. He's calling attention to the mechanisms of predation, the looking, the seeing, the penetrating gaze, and reframing them as evidence of love or care. Complicity and confusion. The victim's perspective. This is the part where we need to be brutally honest about something that makes people profoundly uncomfortable. The story doesn't position Red as entirely passive, and that's precisely what makes it so dangerous. Red notices things are wrong. The famous "what big eyes" dialogue doesn't appear in all versions, but in those where it does, Red is clearly noting discrepancies. The grandmother looks different, she sounds different, something is off. But Red doesn't leave, she doesn't call for help, she stays and engages with the wolf in conversation. Why? Because at this point in the grooming process, the victim is psychologically trapped in cognitive dissonance. Several things are simultaneously true. She loves her grandmother. This person creature claims to be her grandmother. Something feels wrong. She's been taught to obey authority figures. She's isolated. She has no frame of reference for what's happening. So, she negotiates. She asks questions. She's trying to make sense of the contradiction. In modern psychological terms, we'd recognize this as the freeze response. Not physical immobility, but cognitive and emotional paralysis. The dialogue itself becomes a negotiation of boundaries. Each question Red asks is a boundary test. Each answer the wolf gives is a boundary violation dressed up in grandmother language. Red is quite literally teaching the wolf about her own vulnerabilities by asking about them. This is important. The tale doesn't position Red as foolish. It positions her as trapped in a system where the very mechanisms meant to protect her, authority, family, obedience, have been weaponized against her. Child psychologist Michael Lamb, in his research on suggestibility in children, found that children in ambiguous situations with authority figures tend to defer to the authority's version of reality, even when it contradicts what they observe. Red isn't stupid. She's developing normally. She's just placed in a situation where normal development works against her. And here's the darkest part. By the time modern readers reach the climax of the story, we're often positioned to blame Red for her own victimization. She didn't recognize the wolf. She didn't run. She didn't scream. The moral lesson becomes, you should have been smarter, more careful, more afraid. This is victim blaming encoded in narrative form, and we teach it to children. The missing mother. Why authority figures fail. Let's talk about Red's mother, because she's perhaps the most crucial yet forgotten character. She's the one who sends Red into the forest. She's the one who establishes the rules. She's the one who should be ensuring her child's safety, and she's absent. Not physically, perhaps, but functionally completely removed from the moment Red needs protection most. This absence isn't accidental in the tale's structure, it's essential. The mother represents institutional protection, parental authority, and adult care. Her absence from the forest creates a power vacuum that the wolf fills. But here's what's significant. The mother's absence is normalized. It's not presented as a failure, it's presented as a rite of passage. In Jungian psychology, the mother archetype represents both protection and the known world. Her absence represents initiation into the unknown. But initiation without guidance, without actual preparation, without the presence of protective forces, that's not initiation, that's abandonment. And this maps perfectly onto institutional failures in child protection. How many predatory situations involve the absence of protection structures that should be there? How many children are sent into metaphorical forests, to school, to youth groups, to family events, with rules but without actual supervision? The tale teaches children that this is normal, that you'll be sent to navigate danger alone, with instructions but without support. And if something goes wrong, the implication is that you didn't follow the rules carefully enough. The mother, when she reappears, in some versions, doesn't apologize for sending her child into danger. She doesn't acknowledge her own failure to protect. She receives her rescued child, and life continues. The predator's endgame: consumption and silence. The climax of Red Riding Hood varies by version, but the core elements remain consistent, and they're worth examining carefully. In Perrault's version, the wolf consumes Red. There's no rescue. The tale ends with death, framed almost matter-of-factly. In the Grimm version, a huntsman or woodcutter discovers the grandmother's house and rescues both Red and her grandmother from the wolf's belly. Both versions teach something crucial about predation. The predator's endgame is erasure. In Perrault, Red is literally consumed, erased from existence. In the Grimm version, she's swallowed but can be extracted. Both scenarios involve the predator attempting to make the victim literally internal, literally part of himself, literally irrecoverable. This maps onto the psychology of predatory violence. The goal isn't always physical harm, though it includes that. The goal is possession. The goal is to make the victim unable to speak, unable to resist, unable to exist as a separate entity. Consumption, whether literal or metaphorical, is the predator's attempt at complete control. And the predator's tool for maintaining that control? Silence. In versions where Red is rescued, there's often a strange absence of processing. She's extracted from the wolf's belly, and then what? There's rarely any acknowledgement of trauma, no space for her to speak about what happened, no conversation about her experience. She's simply returned to her mother, and the tale ends. This teaches children that even after violation, even after the most intimate form of predatory aggression, the appropriate response is silence and continuation. You're rescued, you go home, you don't talk about it. Research on childhood trauma, particularly from organizations like the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, emphasizes that silence after trauma compounds the psychological damage. The narrative of Red Riding Hood, by ending after rescue without processing or acknowledgement, teaches children that this silence is typical and expected. The real lesson: what we're actually teaching. So let's be direct. What is the actual psychological lesson embedded in Red Riding Hood when we strip away the moral of the story framing? The surface-level moral is, don't talk to strangers, follow rules, stay on the path. But the deeper psychological architecture teaches something far more complex and far more dangerous. It teaches that, 1. Vulnerability is inevitable. You will be sent into dangerous spaces. This is presented not as a social failure, but as a necessary part of growing up. The child internalizes that exposure to predatory situations is normal, not exceptional. 2. Your own judgment cannot be trusted. Authority figures give you rules, but you're also expected to navigate situations where those rules don't protect you. When danger arrives, it's because you didn't follow instructions carefully enough, not because the instructions were inadequate, or because the authorities failed to protect you. 3. Charming predators are indistinguishable from safe people. The wolf is presented as intelligent, engaging, and persuasive. He's not obviously evil. This teaches children that predators might look like authority figures, might talk kindly, might seem to care about you, but the implicit message is also, and you have no way to tell the difference until it's too late. 4. Transgression is seductive. Breaking the rules, picking flowers instead of staying on the path, is framed as both appealing and dangerous. The child internalizes that rule breaking feels good but has catastrophic consequences. This creates a psychological trap where normal adolescent independence is pathologized. 5. Silence is safety. When trauma occurs, or in some versions, when you're rescued from it, the appropriate response is not to discuss it, not process it, not speak about it. This teaches children that keeping secrets about violation is protective behavior. And 6th, adult authority figures cannot be relied upon. The mother sends you into danger. The grandmother is powerless. The hunter-woodcutter has to arrive externally to save you. The institutions that should protect you are fundamentally inadequate. Now, here's what's crucial to understand. These lessons aren't intentional. They're not conscious moral positions. They're embedded in the narrative structure itself, in the sequence of events, in the framing of cause and effect. The tale can have explicit morals that contradict these implicit lessons, and both operate simultaneously in the child's psychology. Neuroscientist Dan Siegel has researched how narratives shape neural pathways, particularly in children. Stories don't just teach lessons, they literally wire neural networks. When a child hears a story repeatedly, their brain is building the connections that underlie their understanding of how the world works. Red Riding Hood, told hundreds of times across centuries, has been wiring vulnerability, isolation, and predatory psychology into the cognitive frameworks of millions of children. The modern relevance, why this still matters. You might think this analysis applies only to historical fairy tale versions told in different eras, that modern retellings have corrected these problems, that we've moved past these narratives. But here's what's striking. Predatory behavior hasn't changed significantly in its psychological mechanisms. The grooming process still involves isolation, boundary testing, authority manipulation, and silence. And the narratives we tell about predation still follow the structure of Red Riding Hood. Consider how institutional child protection often fails. The pattern is remarkably consistent. An authority figure sends a child into a situation with inadequate safeguards. The child is isolated from other protective structures. A predator tests boundaries gradually. The child's own judgment and bodily autonomy are undermined by the authority structure. It's the same narrative structure we've been teaching for centuries. Modern retellings of Red Riding Hood, from Into the Woods to contemporary young adult fiction, attempt to reclaim Red's agency. She becomes a hunter, a fighter, a strategist. But even these retellings often maintain the core structure. She's still isolated, still set up as vulnerable, still positioned to survive on her own, rather than through adequate protective systems. What we haven't done is tell the story where the mother refuses to send her into the forest, where the community creates safe systems instead of expecting individuals to navigate danger alone, where adults take responsibility for protection rather than expecting children to protect themselves through obedience and caution. That story doesn't exist in our narrative tradition because it represents a fundamental shift in how we understand protection and vulnerability. Here's what I want you to take from this. We are not stuck with the narratives we've inherited. Understanding the psychological architecture of Red Riding Hood, how it teaches vulnerability, isolation, and silence, is the first step to changing what we pass on. This doesn't mean banning the tale. It means reading it critically. It means understanding what it's actually teaching. And crucially, it means creating counter-narratives that teach different lessons about protection, about boundaries, about who is responsible for safety. In my next video on fairy tale psychology, I'm going to explore how different tales encode different predatory patterns, and more importantly, how we can retell these stories in ways that actually protect rather than prepare children for violation. If you found this analysis valuable and are interested in understanding the hidden psychology embedded in the stories we tell, please like, comment, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, what fairy tale have you been rethinking since understanding these patterns? Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.